Hi everyone, the title of the paper I'm going to be talking to you today about is Spontaneous Neural Oscillations by Perception by Modulating Baseline Excitability. And just to let you guys know, there's like construction happening in the building that I live in. It's like on and off, so I apologize if there's sound. I'll just try to take over. This is actually the quietest place, but I'm sorry. Moving forward, the aim of the paper was to try to establish the link between spontaneous brain activity and the variability in human perception. The brain exhibits organized fluctuations of neural activity even in the absence of tasks or sensory input. This activity is referred to as spontaneous or pre-stimulus activity. The alpha rhythm is a type of spontaneous activity. Spontaneous oscillations in the alpha frequency reflect changes in neural excitability during performance of certain visual tasks. Specifically, decreased spontaneous oscillations are correlated with heightened neural excitability. Previous research suggests that this heightened neural excitability promotes better perceptual acuity during visual task performance, but there is little evidence for the underlying mechanisms that make this facilitation occur, and the effect seems to be inconsistent across different types of tasks and conditions. This study presents an alternative view that heightened neural excitability reflects a state of biased perception, where a person is more likely to see a stimulus whether one is present or not. That is, changes in neural excitability do not influence the precision of sensory processing one way or another. If true, the results of the study would not only find evidence contrary to previous conjecture, but it may also help to resolve the inconsistencies in previous literature by specifying the link between spontaneous alpha oscillations, neural excitability, and performance in perceptual tasks. The research question was how and under what conditions alpha oscillations affect perceptual performance. The authors designed two alternative models based on signal detection theory. Both models describe the effect of spontaneous alpha power on signal detection. They used two different behavioral paradigms in two experiments to test the models. The paradigms were a yes-no detection task of stimulus presence absence and a discrimination task. The baseline model assumes that decreases in alpha power increase global baseline excitability, amplifying response to both signal and noise. In a detection task, the model predicts a global change in criterion, that is, an increased baseline excitability is correlated to an increased tendency to make yes reports when there are actual stimuli present, that's the signal distribution curve, and when there are no stimuli present, the noise distribution curve. In a discrimination task, the model predicts no effect on behavior. Accuracy is unaffected. In the precision model, predicts that decreases in alpha power will reduce the trial-by-trial variability of the sensory response. This model is based on the observed positive relationship between response precision and attention, which is known to modulate alpha power. In a detection task, the model predicts reduced alpha power improves sensitivity. Here, the difference between the values in the noise distribution and signal distributions indicate changes in sensitivity. For a discrimination task, the model predicts reduced alpha power increases discrimination accuracy. This is what the detection and discrimination tasks looked like. So the stimulus, a couple patch, as you can see, was displayed tilted to the left or right of the fixation task. In detection, participants had to report whether or not they perceived the target stimulus by pressing a button. Immediately after, they had to rate how confident they were in the previous response. In the discrimination task, stimulus was presented either on different locations or the stimulus was tilted in different directions, and participant had to discriminate between the locations and tilt. So they did two experiments. In experiment 1, the goal was to analyze the effect of pre-stimulus alpha power on yes-no detection behavior. They had 30 participants, 60% of trials, target stimulus was present, and 40% there was no target stimulus. Experiment 2, participants did a yes-no detection task and a discrimination task. There were 3 types of experimental trial blocks, one where they were instructed to perform a yes-no detection, another in which they did location discrimination, and another they did tilt discrimination. The goal was to compare the perceptual effects of alpha oscillations in detection and discrimination. They had 35 participants. Note that unlike the detection task in the first experiment, there were no stimulus absent trials. All trials had stimulus targets. They did this because discrimination tasks generally do not have stimulus absent trials, and having stimulus absent trials in one experimental block but not the other 2 may have confounded the comparison. Continuous EEG sampled at 1024 Hertz was recorded while participants performed the experimental tasks. And to analyze how oscillatory power influences performance, they first identified trials with particularly weak and strong power, and then tested how these trials differed in performance measures. For each trial, they tested for each time, frequency, and electrode, and those were sorted from weakest to strongest in 5 bins. The oscillatory power recorded was compared with hit rate, false alarm rate, and sensitivity. They also did a literature review on the effect of alpha power on behavioral performance in visual tasks. They used 22 studies. These are the results of the behavior tasks alone. So in experiment 1, shows that the mean proportion of correct hits and misses for stimulus present. For stimulus absent trials, these are the mean proportions of correct rejections and false alarms. The experiment 2, you have the hits and misses in the detection task. For the location and tilt discrimination, you have mean proportions of correctly discriminated and incorrectly discriminated trials. These are the results of the EEG behavior analysis for experiment 1. It shows the relationship between oscillatory activity and the proportion of yes reports. The hit rate increases during states of weak pre-stimulus oscillatory activity, and the false alarm rate increases during states of weak oscillatory activity. This next figure represents the relationship between oscillatory activity and signal detection measures, criterion and sensitivity in experiment 1. The analysis of signal detection measures confirmed the previous results. During states of weak pre-stimulus activity, stimulus presence is reported more often regardless of actual stimulus presence. It also shows that the difference in sensitivity between states of weak and strong pre-stimulus oscillatory activity is not significant. These are the results of experiment 2, which show the relationship between oscillatory activity and detection discrimination. This shows that hit rate in the detection task increases during states of weak and strong pre-stimulus oscillatory activity in experiment 1. By contrast, in B and C, there is no difference in the proportion of correct responses between states of weak and strong pre-stimulus activity. That is, pre-stimulus power had a null effect on discrimination ability. The majority of studies using criterion-dependent measures affected by change in baseline excitability, this is the top part of the table, found decreased alpha power preceding hits in stimulus-present trials. The majority of studies that use criterion-independent paradigms, like the discrimination task, those are the ones at the bottom, did not find a significant effect of alpha power on performance. In many cases, authors described these as negative results or just very surprising results. The authors also point out that in all but one of the studies, stimulus-absent trials were either not included in the detection task or they were discarded from analysis. And I put a little star next to the one study that did have stimulus-absent trials in the analysis. So to recap, the study tested two different models according to which alpha power affects perception, either via modulation of the baseline neural excitability or the precision of neural responses. It doesn't address conscious awareness directly, but it does try to address the fundamental question of how the momentary internal state of neural system interacts with input from the external world. Fluctuations of spontaneous alpha oscillations bias perception by modulating baseline neural excitability rather than the precision of sensory processing. They influence performance and detection, not discrimination tasks. This is contrary to previous conjecture, and the results help to reconcile apparent inconsistencies in previous literature. The seemingly conflicting results are in fact not conflicting and can be explained by the baseline model. And I think that kind of makes it obvious like why the study is very significant in terms of the broader literature. It's important to note that changes in alpha power do not necessarily imply a change in a subject's decision strategy. The authors used the results according to the baseline model as support for the fact that there is perceptual bias. But the global shift in the noise signal distribution curves could also be achieved if the subject experienced a change in decision strategy and decision bias. For example, you could manipulate the experiment by rewarding the subject for hits or correct rejections, making them prefer to say yes instead of no. You would get a similar looking model. So the inability to differentiate between these two situations is a limitation of signal detection measures. You can resolve this with additional analysis somewhat, but to do those, you need to include stimulus absent trials, which the authors did do here. And that kind of brings me to my next point. So as I said before, in all but one of the studies, the researchers didn't include the stimulus absent trials in yes-no detection, or they were discarded from analysis. So my question is, what is the overall significance of excluding stimulus absent trials? I'm not quite sure myself, but not to be cynical, I kind of thought that maybe it may indicate some sort of experiment bias in terms of like expecting like certain results, because you say that in like a rather large proportion of the studies, the results do not support the like common conjecture that people have. So it seems like there's just like an assumption of a long-held view that is correct, and like anything else just kind of goes out the window. And I think it's a significant limitation, and it seems like kind of an obvious thing to do, I think, to include that. But so that was something I thought was interesting. But yeah, thank you for watching.